Okay, today's webinar is the 2016 STC Salary Database, utilizing the information and key trends. And our presenter is Michael Betcher. Michael, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Deborah. So to get started today, the whole goal of this presentation is basically just to go over the STC Salary Database, show you some interesting items, some ways to use the report, and just kind of explain what this is and how it can benefit you. So to go over what the agenda is, I'll explain about Industry Insights, that's the company I work for, and the 2015-2016 STC Salary Database. We'll go over who should be using this information. We'll discuss how to best utilize it. We'll go over briefly just some trends in the economy and how that affects employment and compensation for all types of professions. And then we'll get into some key specific employment and wage trends that we find for technical writers. A lot of that isn't necessarily going to be severely data intensive where we'll look at tables and go over every single number, but it's more about just showing you how to use the information because everybody has their own unique circumstances, their own things that they want to find out. So it's more of a how to use this while also showing you some of the key items on both the employment and wage front. So just to quickly give you some information about Industry Insights, we are a research company that primarily works with associations. About 99% of our clients are associations. We've been around for 35 plus years. We're made up of statisticians, CPAs, and IT professionals. And the reason I'm just kind of getting into this is we're a company that understands data. A lot of this data is provided from the government, but we are people who know how to interpret it, understand it, and we have a lot of experience doing that. And this is the second year that we've done the STC Salary Database, so we do have familiarity from last year, and then we've taken that knowledge and tried to improve things for this year as well. We are an objective third party, which just means we're not trying to solicit business from STC's members. You're never going to get an email from us trying to solicit any sort of services or anything like that. And we currently do work with over 200 professional associations. We provide all types of studies, from compensation studies to financial studies and everything in between. So to just give you a background about the STC Salary Database, first of all, the data is obtained from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that is an occupational employment statistics survey that they send out every single year. It's actually sent out every 6 months where they collect data, and then it's kind of a rolling type of year information that they put into the output that they make available for everybody. The data itself is based off of 2015 data. Obviously, it takes some time for them to be able to take what they're given, compile it, and then be able to put that in a usable format. The data itself, what happens with the survey is essentially they send the survey out to about 1.2 million different companies where they report back the data that they're requesting. So it's primarily just compensation data and employment data. So they're asking what are people making and how many employees do you have for each of these different profession types. And what they do is they collect the employment levels and wages on over 1,000 occupations. And they use the word occupations rather than job title just because there's a lot of ambiguity with the term job title. If somebody is a director of whatever at one company, they might not be doing the same things that a director of whatever is doing at another company. So instead, they use these occupational descriptions, which really allows people to hone in on what that profession actually is. It gives a description of who this person is and makes it just for a more accurate gauge of employment and wage trends. It does exclude certain employee types. So for instance, if somebody is self-employed, they don't include that information in the results. They're pretty much discarded just because there's so much variance between somebody who might be working self-employed 10 hours a week versus 50 hours a week. So they remove them completely. And the survey itself is completed by HR personnel. So that's not, you're not receiving the survey as an individual and you're not self-reporting. So that takes out a lot of the bias in the data and it makes it for more accurate and valid information. And I had mentioned before that they use occupational descriptions instead of titles. And again, that's just to really hone in to make sure that the person filling out the survey is filling out the survey for the correct individual, not just a job title, which can range all over the place. And for technical writers, I have that definition listed at the bottom of this slide. And the definition of it is write technical materials such as equipment manuals, appendices, or operating and maintenance instructions, and they may assist in layout work. Now, obviously, the people who are technical writers, they'll be able to tell, hey, does this match what I do? But people being who they are and businesses being what they are, a lot of people wear multiple hats in their jobs. So you might have, that may fit you perfectly, or you may have other responsibilities beyond that, or maybe you don't have even all of those responsibilities. But as long as it's pretty similar to you, this should be good information in the report that can really provide you insights to both employment and wage trends of your profession. So just to give you a little bit of background of the actual published report that we produce, you can see some pages here to cover a couple different pages, the type of information we show. It's very data intensive. The report itself is over 180 pages. A lot of that is just detailed tables based off of different types of categories. So for instance, we do show the data by geography, where we'll show it by state, combined statistical area, the metropolitan statistical area, and then non-metropolitan statistical area. So what that allows you to do is you can identify where you live. I, for instance, live in Columbus, Ohio, so I would be able to go into this report, find both Ohio, and I also know that Columbus, Ohio is the MSA area, and I could look to see what are technical writers making in both the state and my metro area. So it allows you to really dig deep into the data, narrow in on the information most important to you. We also show the data by industry classification, and we do that by NAICS codes. And for those of you unfamiliar with what NAICS codes are, it's basically a way to look at different industries. Every industry is given a NAICS code, and then within that, the more granular you get, the more digits of the NAICS codes that you will have. So for instance, if you were just looking at information, if you work in an industry that's just based off of information, that would be a 2-digit NAICS code of 51. If you want to get a little more granular on that, you could look at a 3-digit NAICS code, which would be, let's say, 511, which would be publishing industries. So publishing industries falls under the category of information. So the more digits you get, the more granular you get. So then a 4-digit NAICS code might be 5112, which is software publishers, and software publishers is part of publishing industries, which is part of information. So you're able to really narrow in on the different industries that you may work in. Some industries might not have a whole lot of employment or wage information at the 4 or 5-digit level, so you may want to look at the 3 or 2-digit level. So it's just a nice way to really hone in on the industry that you are currently in or looking to move into. Then we also look at the data by profession. So in addition to technical writers, the BLS, on their survey, they also collect information on similar types of professions, and we want to be able to show that data in order for you to be able to kind of gauge how is the technical writer's profession doing against these similar job occupations. And those other occupations that we show are reporters and correspondents, public relations specialists, editors, writers and authors, and also interpreters and translators. So those are the main areas where we're showing the very data-intensive type of stuff. But also in the report, we have an executive summary type of area where we explain what this report is. It goes over the BLS and the OES survey. It goes over how to best use the report that you can take advantage of, and scenarios that might come up for you where it shows detailed hypothetical cases that will allow you to kind of recreate for your own specific needs and criteria. And then we go into a section on the economy where we just give a background of what's going on, because there are a lot of correlations of the economy to both compensation and employment levels. So it's a pretty data-intensive report with some good analysis on the key trends. A lot of it is by kind of top 10, bottom 10 type of scenarios. So you can see the top 10 states in terms of employment, the bottom 10 states in terms of employment, top 10 industries, bottom 10 industries, just so you can kind of hone in a little bit on the data. A lot of times it becomes overwhelming when you see so many numbers and data tables that we try to make it as easy as possible for you to use the information in a really good manner. So who should be using this information? Well, the first people would be anybody who's a job seeker, somebody who's new to the profession, who just graduated, or maybe looking to transition into the profession. What this data allows you to do is identify which industries have the highest and lowest levels of employment. And that could be a good gauge of, if you are trying to jump in and you look to see that there's a specific industry that you want to get into, but you're seeing that there is a lot of decrease in employment, well, maybe that gives you some insights that maybe there is another industry that might suit you as well that could be a little bit more thriving. The same is true for geographic areas. If you're looking to, for the geographic area, if you're looking to move to a different state, or if you're currently graduating and you want to know what kind of job market there is in that state, then you can use this information to find the best state to go to, the best metro area to go to within a state. And then it also allows you to know how much you should be expected to be paid. So that's a good thing. If you're in college, you're trying to figure out, hey, which direction, which path do I want to go for my career? Well, now you have some information of this, the technical writer profession, I can expect to make this amount of money. If I go into this industry within it, I can make this amount of money. If I go to this state, I can make this amount of money. There is a question here about how applicable the data is for those of us outside the U.S. Some of that just depends on where you're located. The U.S. does have by far the most information on employment and wage trends for more professions than anywhere else. But, if you're in Canada, we have some employment projections for Canada that we found. We don't necessarily have wage projections just because that's a little bit more detailed. But it should be able to give you some guidelines. Any information is better than none, and we are definitely in a world of information where the demand for information is more and more every single day. And this at least is something that you can use as some sort of gauge. Depending on where you are located, I can't necessarily tell you if there's a conversion rate that would say, all right, in the U.S., people are making this amount of money, here I should be making that. That's just a little bit beyond what we're able to extrapolate from the data. So getting back to who else should be using the information, employees. So if you're already in the industry, you're already in the profession, and you want to know, are you being paid fairly? This is a really, really good way to be able to identify that. And I'll show you how to do that later in this presentation to kind of gauge where you are in your work life and then be able to identify how much you should be making from this data. Additionally, it gives you just valuable information for raise requests. So if you know what you're making, you look into the data, it says you should possibly be making $5,000 more. Well, you can take that to a manager or a boss and say, hey, here's data that's being published by the government. It's saying this profession for where I'm at should be making about this much money in this industry and or this geographic location. And you can take that to them. Whether they agree to a raise or not, I don't know, you don't know necessarily, but at least can get the discussion going with some quantifiable evidence. So that way, you have something to kind of stand on and say, hey, I feel like I'm being underpaid. Here's some information. Bring that to your manager or boss, and then you can kind of get a discussion going based off of things that are quantifiable rather than just subjective. So additionally, employers on the other side of that can use it for employee reviews. So for instance, if you are an employer and you want to maintain with employers, there's different compensation strategies that they may want. They may want to be kind of middle of the road, stay with the status quo, kind of be right in the middle with how they pay employees. And that's the way a lot of companies work. Or maybe they want to be a market leader and pay their employees a little bit more than the average employee for other companies, just to gain better talent and try to increase productivity. So with that, the employers are able to use this data to kind of align themselves with their compensation strategy. If they want to be kind of middle of the road, they can look at the data and say, all right, here's the median or the average compensation for a technical writer. This is what we want to pay. Or if they want to be that market leader, they can be looking at the higher levels of compensation and apply that to their employees. It's also very useful for setting budgets. If they're looking to hire, and if an employer is looking to hire new employees for the year or for specific projects, they now have compensation information that can allow them to basically propose costs on projects or allow them to know what the total expenses of payroll are going to be for the year. And then lastly, if you're self-employed or you're a freelancer, while we don't collect that, the data is not collected specifically on self-employed individuals, you can use that just as a way to kind of gauge what you should be offering on your fees. So if a company comes to you and says, we want you to do this work as a freelancer, you know where they're from, you know the industry they're in, so you could probably identify what it would cost them to get a person locally to do that same job. And now you're able to work with your pricing a little bit better with more knowledge to put out a proposal that would at least be competitive or more competitive than without this information. So looking at how to best utilize the data, first of all, the data here should just be considered guidelines rather than absolute standards. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of variation between company compensation packages from one company to another, and there's a lot of variation between two individual people. So for instance, if we're looking at two individuals who have the exact same background, they graduated together from the same college, they have the exact same amount of experience, the same number of certifications, and one goes to one company and another goes to another company, and the second person is making $10,000 more than the first person, on the surface, that seems like they're in a better position. But perhaps when you look at things like retirement plans and healthcare packages and any sort of continuing education help or things of that nature, these other benefits that are available, those two might not be that far apart. And in fact, the person making less on salary may actually have a better compensation package than the person who's making more on the salary. So if the person who is making more salary, that's all they get, they have no other benefits. And then you look at the person making less salary and they have all these great benefits that are top tier, that person overall might be doing better than the person with a higher salary. So when you're looking at this information, that's just some things you need to keep in mind. It's not all just about that salary number. There are a lot of different benefits that come from employment, whether it is retirement or healthcare or, an office with a window or whatever that might be. There's a lot of things that just go into a compensation package that aren't necessarily salary-based. And again, with the backgrounds and education and certifications of people within the profession, those can vary greatly from the person who just graduated to that seasoned veteran with 30 years of experience and top-level education, and they manage teams. There's a lot of variance there. So you just have to be able to look at this information, kind of reflect on yourself, reflect on the peers that you know, and just kind of find out where you fit in amongst that kind of beginning, that just graduated person to that person who's winding down in their career. So in the report, this is all included in there as well, these next steps. It's basically 7 steps to get you started on using the information. It's kind of a guideline of where to go, how you should start tackling the information in here. So the first one is you just want to calculate your wages, and you want to do that in the same way that the BLS defines wages, which is it's just defined as straight time gross pay exclusive of premium pay. So if you have a great retirement account where they're matching 6 to 10% of your compensation, don't include that. It's just your straight time pay. Don't add any of those extra benefits or anything like that. So then you need to kind of assess how you compare to a typical technical writer. And I say the word typical here just because that's kind of a nice gauge to be able to judge yourself off of. And all of you here, you work with other technical writers, you know other technical writers. If you're a member of STC, you know the community, you know things about the technical writer profession that can give you some good insights. So when you look at the group as a whole, kind of just identify what is that middle person, that person kind of mid-career, mid-level in terms of experience, in terms of education, certifications, that sort of thing. And then basically you want to compare yourself to them. And what we do is we show in the report the data on several different levels. The first one is the 10th percentile and 25th percentile. And for those of you who may have forgotten some math over the course of your careers, basically the way the percentiles and quartiles work, and the 25th percentile is a quartile, is if you arrange all the data from highest to lowest, top down, and then break it into quarters, the bottom quarter would be the 25th percentile. And if you break it into tens, so 10 different segments, that bottom segment is the 10th percentile. So when you're comparing yourself to the typical technical writer, if you identify yourself as being below them, you're new to the career, you just finished college, you don't have any certifications, you're 2 years in, you probably want to when you're looking at this data, you want to look at the 10th percentile and the 25th percentile. That probably more falls to where you should be making that kind of compensation and wage rates. Now, if you are that seasoned veteran with, let's say, 20, 25 years of experience, you have an advanced degree, some certifications, now you should be making more, obviously. You have all that experience, all that knowledge, all that past history, and you should probably be looking at that 75th to 90th percentile in terms of wages. That's where you really want to hone in on. And if you fall right in the middle, you're kind of mid-career, mid-level in terms of certifications, education, the average and median are those central points that you want to keep an eye on. That's where you fall. That's what, what's most likely applicable to you. Now, obviously, every situation is going to be a little bit different. You could have tons of advanced degrees and only be 2 years into the profession. Or maybe you have all this past history in a different profession that is applicable, but you've just moved into technical writing. That might push you a little bit different than the norms. So just depending on your situation, you may need to adjust where you need to look in terms of compensation as you go through the data. So the third step is you need to evaluate why you are interested in learning more about employment levels or wages of technical writers. Are you looking to move into the field? And if you are looking to move into the field, you want to know, what's the best industry to go into? Is the compensation what I want it to be? What states or metro areas are best for me? Or are you considering a new job? And if you are considering a new job, where are you going? Are you staying in that industry? Are you moving? Or are you just moving industries? So once you figure that out, you know where to hone in on. If you are thinking of moving, what's the compensation levels in the state you're currently in or the metro area you're currently in, and then the state or metro area that you want to move to? Are you trying to gauge whether you're fairly compensated? That's a big thing that people want to know. They want to know, are they being fairly compensated? And if that's your objective, we'll go over some examples of how you can calculate based off of your own experience and situation if you are being fairly compensated. So then the fourth step is basically starting out to read the economic overview and the report highlights in the executive summary of the report. We'll go over some of that information here, but that's just a good way to get started, understanding what the economy is doing, understanding some of the key trends, and then kind of diving into the data with that knowledge in mind. The fifth step is to narrow in on the industry and geographic areas that apply to you. So again, I'm in Columbus, Ohio, in a research industry. So I would want to go into the data, find the industry, the NAICS code that matches research, and then I would also, on a geographic level, want to go in and find Ohio and then Columbus, Ohio for an MSA level. so I can look at that information. So that's what I'd really want to kind of narrow in on. The sixth step is if you're moving to a new industry or geographic region, you would repeat that step 5, honing in on that industry or that new geographic region that you would be moving to. And then once you do that, you're able to compare the data from where you currently are to where you're looking to move. And with that, something that you would want to keep in mind is that you're able to calculate wage differentials. So for instance, let's say I'm moving from Columbus, Ohio to San Francisco. Well, San Francisco has a much higher cost of living than Columbus, Ohio. So if I take what my salary would be in San Francisco and divide it by what the salary is in Columbus, Ohio, I might get something like a 1.25 because it's a 25% higher in San Francisco. Well, I can take that number and then that wage differential and compare it to the cost of living metrics that are available through tons of different sites and try to identify, is that 25% increase in pay worth the cost of living differential between San Francisco and Columbus, Ohio? And you can make some decisions based off that. Is that move worth it? There's a lot of factors that go into moving, either jobs or moving out of state, but it's just a way to be able to say, all right, here's the difference in salary and here's the difference in cost of living. Is this something that makes sense? Is this something I want to do? It just gives you more information to make your decision. And then the last step is if large variances between your industry and geographic compensation levels exist. So let's say your industry is saying, all right, I should be making $70,000, but your geographic location says you should be making $90,000. Well, what you want to do is probably consider averaging those out at the most granular level. So instead of necessarily looking at a state level, if you have an MSA level, you take that. Or if you're looking at the industry and you have a 4 or 5 digit NAICS code, you would want to look at that instead of 2-digit NAICS code. And then once you have that, you could take that $70,000 and that $90,000, average them out to 80. And that might be a good way to do it. And we'll kind of go over some of that here in a little bit with an example. And then if you want to smooth out the effects of cost of living and the industry variances, you can do that by smoothing it out by weighting. Generally, it's going to be based off a geographic location, weighting the geographic number a little bit heavier than the industry number. And again, I'll show you how to do that here in some upcoming slides. And the biggest takeaway of this is, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information to absorb, but even a relatively simple analysis of what you're making wage-wise versus the industry data in the report can yield you really important insights. It'll provide you with information that you didn't have before. It's not incredibly complex statistical stuff where you have to be a statistician to understand it. It's laid out in this report really nicely. It shows you kind of step-by-step what you should do, and then it just gives you information. And information is, a lot of times power when it comes to negotiations or trying to pull a trigger on changing jobs or moving or anything like that. So that's really what we're trying to do, is provide you with information to help you make better decisions and to help you just understand your own profession. So going over the economy here, what we want to do in this section is basically we're examining several economic indicators which are typically correlated with compensation and employment changes. There's not always necessarily a one-to-one correlation, and obviously different industries and different geographic locations may not always tie exactly with what we see here, but it is a good review of just figuring out, all right, these are the things that are important that help lead to more employment, higher wages. And we just want to go over that, let you see what that is, and then we can kind of get into a little bit of discussion about that. So the first thing that we look at is the real gross domestic product growth rate. So this is how much is GDP growing from one year to the next. As you can see here, it's pretty flat we range from 1.6% in 2011 to 1.5% as a 2016 projection. Everything in between is about 2.5%. The one thing that should be noted here is that the initial projection for 2016 was about 2.4%, but due to some just factors of how manufacturing companies were relying on inventories instead of actually producing more material or more goods, that actually dropped off from that 2.4% projection to a 1.5% projection. In general, we want to see this going up, and the more it goes up, the better it is for pretty much everyone. As GDP goes up, that means profits go up, that means salaries go up, that means everything's working, and the cog in the wheel, it's going and going and going, and things are going well. So we want to see it up. We definitely don't want to see negative numbers. That's not a good situation, but here we've been seeing pretty flat for the last 5 years and projected for the final 2016. So pretty flat rate. There's not a whole lot of expectations that with looking at this that you would expect 5, 10, 15% increases in pay or anything, but things are pretty moving as normal. The table at the bottom of the slide is it's data from the World at Work Salary Budget Survey. And what that is, they send out a survey every year to a variety of different companies across all types of industries and professions, and just ask them basically, what are your projected salary budget increases for the following year, and what was it for this past year? So here you can see pretty much from 2011 even through the projected 2016, expected salary budget increases is 3% or so, which with a budget increase, that just typically means an expectation of employee compensation going up 3% as well. So that's kind of where the world, or the U.S. as a whole, is kind of looking across all industries and professions, is a 3% increase. Now getting into some inflation numbers. Inflation using the Consumer Price Index, what this tells us is what is the value of a dollar today versus the value of that same dollar the prior year. Essentially, they take a basket of goods, whether it be groceries or sporting goods and bikes or whatever it might be, and they look at a variety of different products, and they look to see what would it cost to buy this group of products today versus the prior year. You can see in 2015 we had a -1% inflation, which basically translates into, in 2015 you could buy more, basically the same amount of things for slightly less than you could in 2014. Generally, inflation's, we want to see it flat. We don't want to see wild spikes up or down, just because that really messes with the economy, that messes with salary increases, that just has a really negative effect on everything that's economic related. Here the projection for 2016 is a 1.5% increase. Again, that's not huge, so it's probably a pretty good place to be. The graph on the bottom is our unemployment rates, and you can see from 2011 through 2016 projection, we just see a nice steady downslope. The lower the unemployment rate, the better it is for employees, because when there's fewer people looking for jobs, that just means that there are the employer has less to choose from, which means they likely have to offer either more salary or more benefits in order to draw people in. It also makes, as an employee, switching jobs, if you were thinking about that, moving states, that much easier, just because you know there is likely much more demand for you. Now, the one thing that should be noted here is that 4.8% projection for 2016 is pretty spot on. Right now, through the first half of the year, it was at 4.9%, so the 4.8% seems pretty good as a realistic projection for 2016. But when this number is calculated, the thing that people oftentimes may not know or is not presented through the media is that those who have left the workforce because they have gone to either undergraduate or graduate programs to increase their their schooling or those who have just completely stopped looking for work are not included in that figure. So it's kind of hard to gauge from 2016 to 2011. If people just gave up looking for work, then they're not included in there. They're not being represented. So that 4.8% in any of these numbers is probably a little bit on the low side. Instead of unemployment, a lot of times we like to just call it underemployment because it is more so a percent of people who are still looking for jobs versus everybody who just is looking for a job or gave up or went back to school. So, but in general, as long as we see a downtrend, it's a good situation for people looking for jobs, that they'll be more likely to find a job and they would likely be able to find a higher paying job. So just to give a quick summary of the economy, we've seen steady GDP growth the last 5 years and projected into this year. Again, we saw continued increases in salaries. Everything was about 3%, depending, no matter what the job type was, and that's across all industries, all professions. We've had very, very low inflation. Again, I think it was about 1.5% for this year after a -1% last year. We see shrinking unemployment, which is always good, makes finding a job easier, makes transitioning jobs easier. We have a very, very strong dollar right now compared to the rest of the currencies in the world. We have extraordinarily low interest rates. Even though we had a hike at the end of last year, we're still at historically low numbers. The foreign market uncertainty is something that we need to keep an eye on. And with that, that's things like the Brexit, where the UK left the European Union. It had some immediate effects on our stock market, which then rebounded, but we still don't know the full global implications of that occurring. And obviously in the last few years, we've seen terrorist activity has had substantial impacts on just the world. And when they have attacks in anywhere, especially some of the kind of the larger, more powerful countries, that trickles down to the economy across the world. So those are some uncertainties that we have, but overall the economy keeps chugging away, and it's been very strong. So getting into a lot of this information, we'll start out looking at employment data. So for 2015, it was reported that there was nearly 50,000 technical writers in the United States, and this data might actually be a little bit underreported. Again, I mentioned that the BLS uses OES, occupational descriptions, which somebody might fall into multiple categories and may not be just listed strictly as a technical writer if they wear several different hats. And if you have overlapping skill sets, you might fall into that category where you're a technical writer, or maybe you also do some managing, or you do some layout work, or whatever that might be. You might not fit exactly into it, so the person reporting on it might not exactly put you in the correct category. The STC overall estimates that there's approximately 600 college-level programs dedicated to technical communication, and with so many people going through there, they obviously are getting hired in some sort of technical writer capacity, and that number, the 50,000, just seems a little bit on the low side compared to the number of programs and the number of people coming out. So it is likely underreported, but that's just the reality of the situation, and this is still by far the best data that we have here. We did do an estimate for the number of technical writers in Canada this year, and they have something kind of similar to the BLS, but they do it every 5 years as part of their census of getting number of people in a profession. Their profession isn't exactly technical writers, it's writers and authors, but we were able to work with the data and come out with a number that we felt was pretty accurate for Canada. So that number was over 12,000, so then the combined employment in both U.S. and Canada was a little bit over 62,000 for 2015. Now, looking at the employment levels of the technical writers and the other media and communication occupations, this graph gets a little tight at the bottom there just because there's so much overlap between the writers and authors, interpreters and translators, and also the reporters and corresponders, and also the technical writers are in there. So There's about 4 there at the bottom that's really hard to see, but you can see at the bottom there's a table just showing kind of the increases of each of them over the past few years. As you can see, there's not been humongous growth over the past 5 years. Most of these are increasing around 2 to 3% per year in terms of employment, and that's pretty steady across all of those different professions. So looking at some of this data here, specifically on employment, this is more going to be how you should use the data rather than me reading down every single row of the table. You know, we all know how to read a table. We know what these things mean. I just kind of want to give you some guidance on what you should be looking at. So for technical writers, this table is the largest industry employers of technical writers in 2015. So at the top, we see across all industries, we have about that 50,000 employment, which represented a 3.2% increase versus the prior year. And then we can see computer systems, design, and related services is the most employed industry of all the industries that we're looking at. Now, if you're new to the profession, or if you're looking to change industries, you know, it might seem the best way to choose an industry to go into is which industries have the most the highest employment number. That might be true, but the one thing that I would suggest is when you look at this is to pay more attention to the number change from prior year. So we can see here that the computer system had an increase of 970 technical writers employed versus the prior year, which represents an 11.4% increase. But you may want to possibly stay away from those industries where you're seeing decreases in the number change from the prior year. For instance, the architectural, engineering, and related services, that category had 510 fewer employees in 2015 versus 2014. So that represents a 12% drop versus the prior year. Now, you know, when you see a drop, that typically means, hey, there might be just fewer jobs. There's more people in the talent pool in that specific industry. But it should be noted that it could be a possibility for an opportunity. If the people falling off are baby boomers who are retiring, that could be something where, you know, that was unforeseen by the industry, and it's an opportunity for you to switch industries and have more demand for your skill set in that particular industry. But again, you don't necessarily want to just jump into it if you see a decline. The initial thought is red flag, but if you dig deeper into why that might be happening, it could actually provide an opportunity for you. So this is basically a table of the largest job gains for technical writers. Again, what you want to look at is the number change from the prior year. Computer systems, again, is the top one here with that 970 increase versus the prior year. And then you can see employment services, management, scientific and technical consulting, and software publishers kind of round out the top 4 there. You can see percent increases on that far right-hand side. So again, I'd recommend if you're looking to get into a particular industry or switch industries, what you should keep your focus on is that number change from prior year versus just the total employment number. So looking at the job losses, what does employment services mean? I'll go back real quick. Employment services, that would probably be, I don't have the exact definition, so I don't want to speak incorrectly on it. It's just a industry level provided by the BLS. I'm sure we can, if we go to their website, they would have more information on that. I don't even want to exactly say what it is since I don't know the full definition. So here we're looking at the biggest job losses in 2015, again focusing on the number change from the prior year. The architectural, engineering, and related services saw the highest number of decrease of technical writers employed, which represented 510 technical writers and 12.3%. The wholesale electronic markets and agents and brokers, that saw a 32% drop. So if you're looking to get into these industries, those might not be the best ones to get into. Obviously, if you want to work in a specific industry, you should do what you love, but it should just kind of send a red flag. Make sure you evaluate that a little bit more, that's the industry you want to go into if you're seeing drop-offs like, double-digit drop-offs from one year to the next. So now looking at the state level, this is just the largest states of technical writers in 2015. Obviously, the larger the population of a state, the more likely that they're going to be higher on the employment count for technical writers. California at the top, Texas number 2, that all makes sense. Again, focusing solely on the employment level isn't necessarily the best thing to do. Keeping your eye on that number change from the prior year, that's where you really want to kind of keep your focus, make sure you know what the trend is for that state, making sure that there are employment opportunities there. Looking at the fastest growing states, Texas is growing by the highest number of technical writers of any of the states. New Jersey and Florida tied for second with 300 additional technical writers in 2015. Again, the far right column shows you the percent change versus the prior year. So now looking at metro markets, this is that more granular level. Again, we want to do the same thing, look at the number change from one year to the next versus the total employment count. With any sort of MSAs, it should be kind of noted that these get redefined from year to year. It used to be they would just have an MSA level and that would stay consistent from one year to the next. Now they kind of recategorize and reallocate who is included in that MSA area. So it's kind of hard to say, to look at these from one year to the next, just because they do change every so often. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at it. You might not be able to look at the number change as well as you'd like to on these different metro areas. So jumping into wages, what we have here is just the top one is the median annual wage of technical writers in the U.S., and the bottom graph is the average annual wage. And you can see here what the wages have been over the past 5 years. So the median wage has gone from $64,610 in 2011 to $70,240 in 2015. The averages are generally a little bit higher than the median, just because any sort of really high or really low number, they kind of skew the data a tiny bit. And here you can see across the board, the average is just slightly higher than the median, which goes from $67,280 in 2011 to $73,350 in 2015. Now, each of these represents approximately a 2.5% increase versus the prior years. So we saw that the inflation rate was around 1.5% to 2.5% over the last 5 years, and this is just about the same, if not slightly more than what we saw for inflation. So what that's saying is basically technical writers' compensation is pretty much pacing inflation over the past 5 years. What that means is what you could buy 5 years ago at your 5 years ago salary pretty much is what you can buy now. So there's not a whole lot of upward mobility, but we have seen that GDP growth has been steady. It's not growing that severely, and a lot of other professions are doing the same thing, where it's kind of everybody's just getting this cost of living increase from one year to the next, and they're not necessarily making those headways as we had seen in a decade or so ago. So that's just, as long as people can stay not going down, that's a good thing. A lot of people have that same kind of staying steady as we move forward. So looking at the other occupations that are similar to technical writers, you can see pretty much everybody's flowing at that same kind of 2% increase from year to year. There's no real big jumps. The interpreters and translators in the orange, you can see they had a little bit of a dip in 2013, but for the most part, people are they're relatively flat or just moving up slightly from year to year. So here, I just quickly want to kind of go through and really ingrain into you what you should be looking at depending on your experience level, where you kind of fall in your work life as a technical writer. I'm just going to quickly go over this. Obviously, going into any individual industries isn't going to do a whole lot of good because that's only going to hit a few people, but just want to kind of portray what you should be doing here. So for those who are very new to the industry, the profession, they should be looking at that 10th percentile, 25th percentile range. That's people just graduated, have a few years of experience, don't have any certifications or additional higher level education. That's where you want to look inside those green boxes. Those who are mid-level career, maybe you have 10, 15 years of experience, certification, what you're looking for is that average annual wage and that median annual wage. That's where you should focus your efforts when you're looking through the report. And those at the kind of much more seasoned veterans of the profession have additional education, have certifications, maybe manage teams, you want to be looking at that 75th and 90th percentile range. That's, again, where you want to focus your efforts if you kind of meet that criteria. So again, no matter which kind of table you're looking at, the people who are younger don't have that experience, the 10th and 25th percentile. Those who are kind of mid-level, the average and the median, and experienced are 75th and 90th percentile. So I believe this is our last one. Just again, ingrain it into you. I know you're picking this up, but it's always good just to have repetition. The 10th and 25th percentile, new, mid-level, average, median, experienced, 75th and 90th. So just kind of show you how to kind of use this information, kind of a step-by-step example of 3 hypothetical cases just to get you started. So you can kind of follow this. This information is also included in the report itself. So if you need kind of a refresher of what we're doing here, it's outlined in the report. But I just want to go over these different hypothetical cases. So let's say that you are an individual with 2 years of experience. You're employed in ABC industry, and you live in the DEF MSA area. So what you want to do is look at the data, and you're so new that the 10th percentile is really where you fall. So in there, we can see that the ABC industry, the wage rate for the ABC industry is $46,040, and the wage rate for the DEF MSA area is $59,200. So in order to pretty much identify an approximate wage of what you should be making, what we want to do is take both of those numbers, the industry data and the most granular industry data. So if that's 4-digit NAICS that you fall into, we want to do the 4-digit NAICS. If that doesn't exist, you take that 3-digit NAICS. If that doesn't exist, you take the 2-digit NAICS. But you want to go as granular as possible on that. And that's the same for the geographic region as well. If you only have state data, you take that. But if you have MSA data, you want to use that instead. So we take the 2 numbers that we have both from the industry and the geographic region and just average them out. So looking at those 2, you just add them together, divide by 2, and your approximate wage for that individual with 2 years of experience in the ABC industry in the DEF MSA area is $52,620. So pretty straightforward. That's not a hard thing to do right there. So now, let's say that you have 15 to 20 years of experience. You have an advanced degree or certifications. You are employed in the GHI industry, and you live in the JKL MSA area. So kind of following that same pattern, we know with that experience and those degrees and certifications that we should be looking at the 75th and 90th percentile. Maybe that person feels they fall not necessarily at the 90th, not necessarily at the 75th, but they want to kind of do a right in between, right at that 82.5 percentile. They feel like that would be a good place for them to look for what their wage should be. So what we do here then is for the industry, we take the number of the 75th percentile, that 90,910, and the number for the 90th percentile, the 103,000, and average them to get the $96,955. We do the same thing for the location, which yields us $106,475, and then we combine the 2. So we take, again, the number from the industry, the number from the location, add them together, divide by 2. So this kind of allows somebody who feels they're right in between that 75th and 90th percentile, kind of shows you how you can get that approximate wage of what you should be making based off of your industry and your location combined. Now our last hypothetical, it's the same thing as number 2, but let's say that the geographic location is somewhere like a San Francisco or a higher cost of living area, and we want to be able to weight the compensation level more heavily on location than we do on industry, because the location is really going to pump that compensation level up. So to show you how to do that, it's pretty much the same thing. We want to focus on that 75 to 90th percentile because they feel like they're right in that 82.5 percentile range based off of their experience and education and certifications. So we're looking at the same numbers, and this time when we're doing the industry, we're saying that that's only worth 25% of the total compensation, where the location is worth 75% of the compensation because, again, higher cost of living, we need to account for that. So we do the same thing we did before. We take the 2 industry numbers, divide by 2, but now we take that $96,955 number, we multiply it by 0.25. And then we do the same thing for the location, but we weight that more heavily at a 0.75. So now for the industry, we get 24,239. Location, we get 79,856. And we add those together to get the approximate weighted wage of 104,095. So, these are just 3 pretty simple ways that you can use this data. Using both industry data and geographic location data. Again, you want to look at the most granular level if you can. If you don't have it all the way down to a 5-digit NAICS code or a 4-digit NAICS code, just get the NAICS code that is most granular as possible. Same for location. If you have an MSA or state, you want to use the MSA over the state data if possible. So just to recap, everyone can use this data, whether you're an employee, employer. If you're just getting into the industry, it provides valuable information to you. There's a lot of data to sort through, but we give you some guidelines that we went over here and are included in the report to really allow you to narrow in on the different areas that would most benefit you, whether it's geographic location or industry, and this kind of gives you some of those examples of how you can use this data to figure out your appropriate wage that you should be making based off of your own experiences and individual circumstances. As you go through, just be objective. Don't try to make yourself, 2 years in, don't think you should be making as much as the 90th percentile person. Just be objective when you're looking at yourself versus the rest of the profession. And again, the data should be considered guidelines rather than absolute standards, and compensation packages play a huge role in that. It's not, everything's not just salary-based. You need to look at the whole picture of your 401k, your health care plans, and all of that when you're looking at how much you make versus other people in the profession. So that kind of wraps it up. If we have questions, please feel free to ask them now. Or if you have additional questions, you can contact me directly. My information's up on the slide, and or you can contact STC. They're very familiar with this information as well.
Okay, if there are no questions, thank you very much, Michael. That was a great webinar, and thank you to everyone who attended. We do have more webinars coming up, so please check out our education page on our website at www.stc.org. And remember, an email is coming your way shortly that will have a link to the recording of today's webinar, as well as a link to an evaluation. If you fill out that evaluation, you can download a PDF of today's presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you again, Michael.
All right, thank you.